All right, thanks everybody for listening in. This is going to be an interesting conversation, primarily because all the stuff that we just talked about is not the stuff that I'm focused on primarily. I'm coming at this from a marketing perspective or a launch perspective, and obviously the notion of ready, fire, and aim is wrong, right? That's out of sequence. And the question that we get a lot of times, or some of the challenges that I see along the way, is that we're launching before we're really ready or we're aiming at anything. So the one thing that I want to focus on today, hopefully this benefits some folks on the conversation, is about really positioning what it is that you're about to build. But the first thing we're going to start off with is a story, and we're going to be talking about your teeth. All right, stick with me. There's a reason behind this. This icebreaker is courtesy of The Power of Habit. This is an amazing book. Can't talk enough about it. Go get it for yourself, but I'm not going to plug the book here overall, but take a look at it. So in the early 1900s, I have no idea why in America nobody was brushing their teeth. Even though toothpaste has been around for quite some time, even dating back, in the BC time frame, I think we like our teeth, and I guess it wasn't cool or something. For some reason, people weren't picking up on it. And so a new toothpaste brand came onto the market called Pepsodent. It was introduced in about 1915. And these guys, traditionally kind of in our space from an advertising and a marketing perspective, hired Claude C. Hopkins, probably one of the most famous ad executives at the time, maybe really of all time. And they engaged him to promote their product. So he dug into the research and dug into the product. And of course, he dug into the user experience, and he stumbled upon a medical insight that positioned toothpaste in a way no one else had done before, which makes perfect sense because he wrote a book because he was a smart guy. From a scientific approach to advertising, it perhaps was something remarkably different for them. But what he did was he introduced an idea for a campaign that was just run your tongue across your teeth. No, really, literally. The campaign said, just run your tongue across your teeth and you will feel this film, because what he'd studied was this bacterial film that actually caused teeth to look a little off color. And of course, promoting the brand, Pepsodent removes the film. Obviously, success story. 3 weeks after the first Pepsodent ad campaign, demand for the toothpaste exploded. And lo and behold, a little bit after that, about a decade later, more than half of the country is brushing daily. And Pepsodent, of course, was one of the most successful brands in the world. And this one campaign by itself is credited with, kind of creating a habit from our country's perspective, from a national toothbrushing perspective. Something us marketing nerds call category lift, rising tides and all that. So what's the big deal about this? Why is this story something that I want to talk about? Even products that are needed, right, hopefully, that solve a really basic problem, that are seemingly really easy to adopt, need the right story. They need the hook, they need the marketing, they need positioning to really get things going. And so I think each of us here probably are here because of a multitude of reasons. Maybe we are the creator, we're a founder, maybe some other genius started something with an amazing idea that started one late night in a pub with a bunch of friends. Regardless of what our role is today, a developer, a designer, a strategist, a marketer, a founder, or whatever, our singular goal is the customer. We should always have our customer in mind. We should always get that idea to the customer, whomever they may be. And so this journey, of course, is pretty difficult. And I'm going to assume that most of the folks today are here from a product development perspective, or an NPD perspective for short. And I wanted to share a bit of the full life cycle, so that you can understand how much we count on you to develop adoption by the customer, and why we care so much about the customer journey and empathy and, the so what about the product. And I know the journey is absolutely nuts. It is complicated. It's long, it's sprinty, it's hurry up and weighty, it's overly sophisticated, it's underfunded, sometimes it's overfunded, but it requires consistency and patience along the way. And most importantly, it can start with positioning, your positioning. Not the ad guy uncovering some bacterial coating on your teeth. If you have the position for a product or feature, obviously it influences how you categorize that product within a portfolio of things like full-size toothbrushes or travel toothbrushes or electric toothbrushes. But in the end, they're all toothbrushes as a category. And once you identify where or how it fits in as a category, you can line it up against other similar different products in their categories, like floss or pastes or tongue scrapers or mouthwashes, to create a roadmap to tell a broader story. Obviously, you see where I'm going with this about dental products. And then once we have all that together, we can get going, because it doesn't really make sense for your team, especially your lead salesperson, to go out there and promote one brush, but rather a galactic assortment of dental hygiene goodness, right? We all want to do that at the end. Okay, that's a little silly analogy, and I was told we're going to talk about teeth at the beginning. So I want to share 6 things with you today that hopefully provides you some insights from an MPI perspective or from a marketing perspective of why it is so important for the developers, the producers, the builders, the dreamers to share your journey along the way, especially how you position your ideas. It's your responsibility. This is no naggy statement about it's your responsibility, you better go do it. It's your responsibility, because one of the most powerful things from a Salesforce perspective, I always love saying, is that a company's employees are the ambassadors of a brand. And maybe it's not your core responsibility, but you have the power to influence audiences more than you think. Your positioning becomes your proverbial North Star. So every step along the way of the journey requires a reminder, constant reminder of what we're doing for the customer. Don't lose sight of that. No matter how long you've been doing this, no matter how much it's changed, and maybe you've lost sight of it. Maybe it doesn't really matter to you anymore. It's all about customer centricity in this in the end. And even if you didn't start the process, or maybe you're joining the process late, the team or the person maybe before or after or above or sideways or next to you, they can always benefit from your alignment. It's always good to share the commonalities for the vision and the positioning that we have, because at the end of the day, we have to constantly make sure that we reinforce why we got started on this process all along. Second thing I want to share with you, difference between description and positioning. It's red and it's a bit sour. So I'm either talking about a cherry sour chewy candy or wine. That's a description. It pairs well with the scallops and roasted beets and a dollop of ketchup with the aromatic note. That you get what I mean. So there's a difference between positioning and how we do that overall. And this is what I'm building overall, right? In terms of how you're positioning your story. Am I going to tell you what I want you to know about my product? Or am I going to tell you that I'm going to build a product for what you wanted? And I built this specifically for you. And there's different approaches. We call that inside out or outside in positioning. But most importantly, be special. Make it unique, make it memorable, make it exclusive, be exciting, be relevant, and be compelling above all. Third thing we'll share with you today is about development and marketing. Obviously, you put the word product before that, product development, product marketing. There is some significant differences. And the first thing I want to talk about is, what is career path, your job, or your profession overall? And I'm sure that today they're all spectrum of experience and expertise here. Where do you want to go? Are you somebody that wants to be an evangelist to tell the story about the product to help guide your journey? Are you want to be the most significant support maven to drive success for repeat visits and loyalty for the product as a whole? And so, as a developer, how do you become a marketer? Or maybe as a marketer, it's about understanding how I can learn how development impacts in the back end of what I'm developing overall. And most importantly, you're closest to the it, right? Some of the most powerful and compelling presenters I've ever seen have been the builders, because you're so close to it. I'll never forget riding in an elevator with a chief executive of a Fortune 100 company. I was 25 at the time, and the guy asked me, "Do you know what my job is?" And of course, immediately I thought this was the end of me. I have no idea what's going on. He said, "I'm the number one salesperson in this company, not in terms of sales, but he has to represent the company, the people, the brand, the offer, the opportunity across all spectrums." And it makes sense that he grew through the role, and he'd been there his entire career. This was his only job. Of course, He knew his origins. I knew his origin story as an engineer in a foundry in Syracuse, but I never forgot that conversation because there was nobody that was more compelling or passionate about this brand or this product than the people that are closest to it, without a shadow of a doubt. And the thing that I found more so than anything else is that builder, the maker, the dreamer, or if you're like me, the nerds in the world, your story will be correct because you've spent the hard work developing, planning, researching, ideating, iterating, failing, succeeding again. And this intelligent, divergent thinking, if packaged in an amazing, straightforward, and clear narrative, can be delivered. Everybody can understand what the offer is, or what the solution, or where your focus is across the board. Fourth thing to talk about is the audience, or in this case, the persona. We all seen giant stacks of research, right? There's demographics, there's psychographics, there's geographics, there's behaviors. There's differences between each of these. And chances are, if you don't know what you need to say about a product, or how to position a product, or how to articulate a statement, there's something that you can probably extract from a demographic, whether it's something oriented to age or income or gender, or perhaps from a psychographic where you understand attitudes and personality and interests, or maybe even geographics, because it's significantly different to sell or promote and discuss about a product between regions and languages and even climate. Like trying to sell warm winter jackets to somebody in the desert really doesn't make any sense unless it's a cold desert. And then, of course, there's behaviors, right? Interactions and patterns and transactions about how the individuals operate across the board. Most importantly, from an audience perspective, what or who is going to create the most positive forward movement? And I like to break this down into really three audience types. You have influencers, you have buyers, and you have users. And if you have the ability to position whatever it is that you want to do to the right person that can make the most positive evangelistic movement from an influencer perspective, or the best product review from a user perspective, or the most compelling proposition for life cycle, for example, from a buyer perspective, you have to understand that each one of these influences each other, and coming at them with a succinct, tight message for what it is that you're offering can do amazing words. And keep this in mind. Just because you like the product, because you're working on a product, or you're developing, you're positioning, you're talking about things, you're talking to a person, not a brand. Because who I am between the working hours of 8 to 5 or midnight, however long you work, is significantly different between who you are from 5 to 8. There's the professional side and there's the personal side, and how you position and talk about things across each can and should be significantly different across the board. Last thing, second to last thing we'll share is going to be about AM and SOM. Obviously, there's all the analytics that you can get into from a research perspective to look at it. And I know what they stand for, and there's all kinds of permutations of who you sell into and who you position against. But you got to know where you're going to find success. Whether it's in the total addressable market, which is the largest of the large possibility for sales to sell into, or the product to have influence in, or the serviceable obtainable market, which is probably the focal point and the target that you have. Because at the end of the day, what you're building, or why you're doing it, or what you're most passionate about, you probably want to relate to it a little bit. You're just making shoes in general, or are you making lightweight, high performance running shoes for ultra marathoners? And what do you have the most familiarity and experience with to connect with the audience, to position your product or your offer or your conversation in a way that makes them turn their heads, stand up, and pay attention to what it is that you have to offer? And I know it's probably contra academic, because academically they say to promote the larger scale. You have to understand your stage and phase of where you are in your life cycle, because you don't want to overextend your reach. I always suggest smaller at the start and broader at the big. I've seen and heard from too many brands that launch stuff that, I'm seeking world domination, when they could have succeeded amazingly with a very narrow, tight focus in terms of what they were doing from a launch perspective overall. And then one of my favorites, BMS, stands for brand marketing and sales. And it depends in terms of the order that they have, but the reason why foundationally the power of the brand is one of the most important things, and the way you position it, the way you talk about it. When you talk about your employee base or your ambassadors, so to speak, you want to get that message correct, because ultimately what you need at each phase is going to be triggered based upon what that message influences at the marketing phase or ultimately at the close phase. And there is not one size fits all, because ultimately, whether you're developing a core product, whether it's software, whether it's a piece of hardware, whether it is a service, at the end of the day, building a product requires simplicity and consistency in repeating some core messages across the board. So I'll leave you with these kind of six overarching topics, if you will. There are dozens more that you could take away. Hopefully, maybe one or two of these points are something relevant to you that you can take forward or just do some additional research on. These are all public information that you have access to that can broaden your knowledge base or information throughout the board. And one thing I'll leave you with, just as an FYI, talking about this world of MP3 players. And I've been on this planet for a while, and I remember seeing my fair share of digital media players back in the day. And this all started before 2001. And there were dozens of them. And they were amazing. And they stored and they played and they menued and they advanced and they playlist. But then suddenly something happened where one brand came out and positioned themselves across all the others. We all know who that is. And we all know that this brand consistently does this specific task of positioning well. I was introduced in 2001 when there were a sea of MP3 players beforehand. So anyway, this is just another example of just amazing messaging for across the board. I know regular cadence, people will actually introduce themselves up front. I thought I'd introduce myself up and back. I'm Pagogh. It's a pleasure talking with you today. I like to think of myself as a 50-50 kind of guy. Half of my time I've spent on the client side, half of my time I've spent on the agency side. I do consider myself a builder, cut my teeth on code and some of the early site development in '92, but ultimately had to force myself into becoming a promoter of that. So maybe I found my narrative, my voice. I've been a native since '87, so building computers, pioneering the web as a lifetime geek, and I'm always curious of things going forward. And please feel free to reach out to me. Hit me up on chat or Slack or whatever to follow up if there's any questions that you have or any topics that you'd like to find some more information on. And go brush your teeth. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I didn't know I was going to get so much insight into brushing teeth and the history of that talk. So thank you for sharing. So just a reminder to everybody out there, if you have any questions from the talk, I can see Kasim has made a comment about 1,000 songs in your pocket. But if anybody has any questions that they would like to put to Pagogh, please do write them in here on whichever platform that you're watching this on, and I'll put those questions through to Pagogh. But one thing I just wanted to start with is with that kind of, as you were saying, with the positioning, because you could have toothbrush, you could have mouthwash, you could have maybe chewing gum. There's lots of these things that are all trying to tackle the same problem of, oh, I don't like that feeling of roughness on my teeth. When I was listening to that, I was thinking about in product management, there's a lot of talk about the jobs to be done framework, and that you're not necessarily competing. Netflix isn't competing with Disney. They're competing with somebody going to the movies, somebody doing something else with their evenings other than watching TV. So my question there is, do you see a large overlap between product management and marketing, and where do you see the actual boundary between who is trying to define the positioning and the kind of the messaging around a product?
I always think that should start with the product management side of things, especially from the ideator that proverbial cocktail napkin generally starts on the build cycle, right? The ideation for what it is that we have. You'll see brands that come in on the tail end where the marketing drives the product. That's not incorrect. I just think that they need to, from a marketer's perspective, and obviously I spent most of my time, like I said, halfway as a builder, halfway as a marketer. There's something to be learned by both. And I think from the product development side and the product management side, getting the insights about the market research and positioning the why you're building this, all the focus group testing that you might do, all the intent-based work that you do, has to be played forward into what your communicating outbound. Frequently, it's difficult to articulate what you want to do as the product manager, right? At the end of the day, and you have to translate that. I use physicians, love physicians, smartest people in the world, right? Doctors, but they are themselves not maybe the best marketers, but holy mackerel, they can actually do all the work, surgical diagnosis, etc. So you'll have to take a little bit of the grain of salt with them, from a messaging perspective to bring that forward. Software, hardware, whatever kind of platforms you talk about, it varies significantly. But I think that's a management responsibility overall.
You touched on a point there. I really liked. It's just about at what point does marketing come in? Because there's a big push to kind of move towards product teams where there's kind of cross-functional, instead of throwing something over the wall or product, just throwing over, here's some research and here's a product. Now you go sell it to people and make sure they buy it. Where do you see a bit more of marketing coming in early and really working and collaborating with the team kind of before that launch?
Yes. The earlier, the better. And this is where, operational diagrams or structures or workflows like RACEs or, kind of responsibility matrices work out. From a marketer perspective, it is about understanding what I'm doing to push this forward, right? And it's not something that we have to learn more about the so what before we get into the developing the asset going forward. So I don't like the silos. I don't like the hard walls where it's like, okay, I've hit my design objective, or I've hit my MVP, or I've hit some kind of milestone along the way, because there might be some market insights that you're actually gathering from the sales side or the customer insights perspective that are directly could influence what product is being developed on the back end. That could be much more symbiotic in terms of how they improve. So short answer, yeah, marketing should be pulled in earlier. We also need to learn to be quiet, right, and listen to the product, understand what the so what behind the vision and the idea, rather than coming over I've heard this from the sales team, I've heard this from customers, I've heard this from the industry, blah blah blah, my opinion. And let the product be the product, right? I mean, let the product really take it forward, and then build the story and the narrative, what we like to call air cover, right? I'm gonna go in there and promote something specifically, but I need to provide the air cover from a marketing perspective. But it's got to be based on, the brilliance of what sparked the innovation to begin with.
Great. No, it's very much my opinion on things as well. It's always, I hate seeing the kind of the throw over the wall, and then the marketing message and the product, they don't fully line up, and
right
all those problems.
Yep.
One thing, and it's kind of slightly left field, but anybody else can ask questions, please do type them in. But one thing that, with your example of the iPod, and a story that I always remember because I thought it was quite interesting, Apple, when they saw that there was a little bit of traction with the iPod, they decided to take all of their Mac advertising budget and put it all into the iPod. And so everything went into one. How do you think teams can work like that in an ecosystem where you have multiple products, and the net result for people, because the iPod was so popular, it actually resulted in an increase in Mac sales. So
sure,
by moving their budget over, it was a good strategy. So how do you think teams, which tend to be kind of, if you're building a product, you're very much focused on yours, how do you try to help people to see those ecosystem synergies?
Ooh, bottoms up or tops down? It's going to be interesting. From teams to associate that unilaterally is going to take a very brave and kind of unique team to really be able to think from an unbiased perspective, right? Bias is horrible from a research perspective, especially when we do focus groups or UX or some of those components. So we want to leave our biases aside and truly evaluate what your peers have to offer. And that's where, not all teams are created equally. And that's not a criticism or an indictment. That is, if you don't have the ability to tell your story, your positioning, your value prop, all your stuff, even though before it gets into the marketing hierarchy, how can you let your own development teams kind of peer review and do it bottoms up? from an Apple perspective, that was just, going all in on a product that, you're absolutely right, it lifted the entire brand right up, and everything became, we all know what happened after that. And it's, it's reinforced the cult of Mac, and, and expanded it beyond. Very few companies are willing to, it's a horrible phrase, sacrifice their young to really, play to the greater good. And that's part of, my responsibility as a builder or an engineer is to get something from sprint to sprint, from, from milestone to milestone, from whatever it is. And I don't pick my head up and go, what else is going on? And I think, the collaboration and the I don't know, the ability for people to actually understand where software within an organization works with the piece of hardware that might be being built right next door can commingle to create, I don't know, something called iTunes and a piece of hardware, And I think it's just having visibility in terms of what your overall portfolio is, and hopefully, having the visibility and the empathy to actually identify those, and say, don't promote myself, I'm going to promote you this time, or maybe rally folks to promote them. It's a different behavior, especially in a credit-driven world.
Yeah, I can imagine some internal politics at play in one of those decisions, but
Right,
I think
right.
Steve Jobs was able to make those unilateral choices.
Yeah.
But I think that brings us to time. So thank you very much, Pagogh. I really enjoyed that, and thank you for sharing.